Andy, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you here. AWS has grown incredibly under your leadership over the last several years. Has it surpassed even your wildest expectations?
Well, it's certainly grown really fast, and I don't think any of us would have had the audacity to predict it would grow as fast as it has. But I think we always believed it had the chance to be a really significant business, and that's because just inside of Amazon, which is a really strong technology company, we had a lot of internal development teams that wanted help moving faster, more cost effectively, and building their applications on top of an infrastructure technology platform. And so the fact that Amazon really wanted this made us think that third parties would really want it. And then, of course, I don't think we would have predicted that it would be a $15 billion revenue run rate business growing a little bit over 40% year over year this quickly. And that I don't think we would have predicted that we would have several times the size business of the next 14 providers combined, or that we'd have millions of active customers, or that we'd have a 6 to 7 year head start. So all those things were big surprises to us.
Of course, your competitors now want this too. How do you make sure Amazon stays in the leading position?
Well, I think there's a few things. I mean, it's not a surprise to us that every large technology company in the world is interested in building a replica of what AWS has done. It's such a great value proposition for customers that it's why it's being adopted so fast, so others will want to participate. I think that there are some real differences between the platforms today. I think the first thing is that AWS just has a lot more functionality by a large amount than anybody else, and we're also iterating at a faster clip, so that gap in capability continues to extend. And then I think there are really different ecosystems around these platforms. It's not just the thousands of systems integrators who've built practices around AWS, but most ISVs or SaaS providers will adapt their software to work on one technology infrastructure platform. Some will do two, very few will have the time to do three. And they all start with AWS just because we have such a significant market segment leadership position. And then I think the maturity of the platforms are also in really different places. We have this expression we use internally that there's no compression algorithm for experience. And that's because you just can't learn certain lessons until you get to different elbows of the curve and scale. And with several times the size business of the next 14 providers combined, they just haven't learned those lessons yet. And so you see that in all kinds of manifestations of performance.
You just added GE as a customer. Same time, you lost Spotify to Google, Bank of America to Microsoft. Tell us about the lengths that you're going to not just get new customers, but make sure you keep the customers that you have.
Yeah, we have millions of active customers. And the way to think about an active customer for AWS is it's a non-Amazon entity that's used our platform in the last 30 days. So we have millions of active customers, and they span the gamut. So, most of the big successful startups have built their businesses completely from scratch on top of AWS. And these are companies like Pinterest and Airbnb and Slack and Domo and Robinhood. But over the last 3 years, the enterprise and public sector adoption has really dramatically increased in the cloud and in AWS. And you see every meaningful vertical business segment using AWS, whether if you're talking about oil and gas, it's Shell and BP and Hess. In financial services, it's Capital One, Intuit, Commonwealth Bank of Australia, and FINRA. In manufacturing, GE, you mentioned, they've been actually working with AWS for a long time. They're moving 9,000 applications to AWS. And Schneider Electric and Philips and technology, Netflix runs completely everything on top of AWS, even though we compete with them in our video business. And then in the public sector, we have nearly 3,000 government agencies worldwide using AWS. So we just have a lot more customers in every imaginable segment than you'll find elsewhere.
You mentioned Netflix. Obviously, they're your biggest competitor in streaming. Is there any scenario under which that would change, where you wouldn't serve them?
No. Well, it's Amazon's consumers' biggest competitor in streaming. But AWS, from the very start, was set up as a separable entity with a separable leadership team. And we realized that if we wanted to serve a lot of Amazon's consumer business competitors, we had to not only have the most functionality and the best platform, but we also had to treat those customers as every bit as important as Amazon's consumer business. And in fact, I think if you were to talk to Netflix, if you asked Reed Hastings, he would tell you that AWS treats Netflix as every bit as important as Amazon's consumer team. Amazon's consumer team may argue we treat Netflix even better than we treat our consumer team. But I think that you have to live to that. And Amazon's consumer business is a really big AWS customer, but they really are just one other large external customer. That's the way we treat the relationship.
AWS has traditionally been fairly self-serve. Are you adding more sort of human interface, human sales tactics to lure customers?
Well, AWS started off as completely self-service. When we launched in 2006, we had 2 salespeople. And I remember within the first couple of weeks of launching our first service, which was S3 in March of 2006, I remember one of our 2 salespeople wrote me a note saying, "You're not going to believe it, but somebody just said they're going to use 6 terabytes of storage in AWS in S3." And we said, "Are you sure 6 terabytes?" We couldn't believe it. Which, of course, today, there's exabytes of data, stored in S3. So, in the very beginning, it was self-service, but for the last 10 years, we've been building a very significant field team of sales people and account managers and professional services and solutions architects and technical account management and support. So we have a very large field team at this point, and you can't really service the enterprise and the public sector if you don't.
How do you think AI, artificial intelligence, that's the buzzword these days, will change the future of AWS and also the future of the customer experience?
I think most applications over time will have some form of machine learning and AI infused in them. And today it's still, if you look at AI and ML usage, it's still relatively early days, but virtually every enterprise and startup is interested in it. And I think that the way we think about it at a high level is that there are kind of 3 layers of the stack. At that lowest level is for the expert machine learning practitioners. And they're the ones who know how to build deep learning models and tune them and do inference. And it's a lot of hard work. And the vast majority of machine learning being done in the cloud today is being done on AWS, on our P2 instances that we have that are optimized for that. But if you really want machine learning to explode in terms of usage at enterprises, we have to make it more accessible to everyday developers. Very few companies have those expert machine learning practitioners. If you can't make everyday developers successful with machine learning, it won't really expand the way we all believe it will. And I would say today, everybody's got offerings at that middle layer of the stack for everyday developers, but they're all a little bit too hard, in my opinion, to really allow it to expand the way it will. And that's another area of focus for us. And then at the top layer are solutions where customers say, here's an object, tell me what's in it. Or here's a face, tell me if it's part of this facial group. Or let me translate text to speech, or let me build conversational apps. We've released all of the technology in Alexa in a service that we call Lex. And we have a large number of those services. And if you look at every layer of the stack, we're investing very significantly. And the jury's still out on what will be the layers that are most used. Today, given where we are in the market, you see the most amount of usage at that bottom layer and at that top layer. I think the real jewels for most companies is the machine learning and AI that can be done in their own data. So I think that we all have to solve that middle layer for it to be really expansive.
So beyond AI, what are some features that you see adding in the future?
Well, as I mentioned, ML and AI are a huge area of focus for us. I think if you look at connected devices, there are going to be billions and billions of these devices in our homes, in our workplace, in factories, and cars and planes and ships and oil fields and agricultural fields. And if you think about these devices, they tend to be small devices with relatively little CPU and relatively little disk, which makes the cloud disproportionately important for them. And in fact, if you look at most of the big IoT applications today, they're using AWS in a significant way, whether it's Illumina has its genome sequencing machines hooked up to AWS to do analytics in the cloud, or John Deere has 200,000 telematically enabled tractors that collect planting information real time, send them to AWS, do analytics in AWS, and then send information back down to the planters. Or if you ever watch StatCast on Fox in Major League Baseball, that's a big old IoT application that's running on a combination of the small data center rooms in the 30 Major League ballparks in AWS. But if you think about the future, a lot of these devices are going to want to run analytics and processes in the cloud, but they're also going to want to run some of those functions on the device themselves and not make the round trip to the cloud and take that latency, or they may not have the connectivity to do it. And so what they really want is a consistent programming model between what they can run in the cloud and what they run on devices. And that's why we built Greengrass, which we launched at reInvent last year, which gives people Lambda, which is our event-driven serverless computing service, so that developers will say, when I see these signals, I want to take these actions, and these ones I want to run in the cloud, and these ones I want to run on the device itself. So I would say IoT is another huge area of investment for us.
Google, Facebook, now even Alibaba and Baidu have offices in Seattle. What are you doing to make sure your talent doesn't get poached?
I think the most important thing, and it's true whether there's competition from other companies or not, is you want to hire people that fit your culture. And for us, that's builders. We disproportionately index on hiring builders. And when I say builders, I mean people who like to invent, people who like to look at different customer experiences and assess what's wrong with them and reinvent them. And people who get that launch is the starting line, not the finish line. Anything that you want to do that's going to be successful long term, you have to listen to what customers tell you is important and then keep iterating on their behalf. So you want to hire what fits with your cultures, which are builders for us. And then you want to actually make it a place where builders can build. And I think for us, if you look across Amazon and you look at the amount of building and the amount of inventing, all with customers at the center of that, along with our long-term orientation, I think it's a place that builders love to be at. I don't think there's a better place to build than at Amazon.
The center of cloud talent is very much in Seattle, in part because of AWS and the work you've done. As you look towards HQ2, do you see dividing that team? Do you see how much of the cloud talent goes to HQ2 and how much stays here?
I don't know the answers to any of the questions around HQ2. I think we're in a process right now where we're trying to assess what we're going to do there. But I would tell you that already in AWS, while the majority of people are here in Seattle, we have teams all over the world. You know, we have teams in Virginia, we have teams in Boston, we have teams in Dublin, we have teams in Cape Town. The original EC2 product in AWS was built by a dozen people in Cape Town. So we have had in AWS teams all over the world from the very start, and we'll always, you know, when you have a new service that you're building that's separable from what you're doing, you can choose to locate it wherever you want. And then there are other services where the business and the teams are really growing, where you very often will want to keep that team together. And my suspicion is we'll do the same thing here.
Jeff Wilke professed an affinity for his hometown of Pittsburgh. He hopes that it goes to a place where there's strong STEM education, public education. Are you jostling for your hometown? Are you jostling for New York?
That's above my pay grade, Natalie. I mean, I think, none of us really know at this point where it's going to be. We're in the middle of a process, and we'll have to all see.
All right. Well, everybody is waiting to see. So let's talk about what's going on globally. Africa is a potential area, I know, for you. How lucrative is a place like Africa and other underserved regions around the world?
Yeah, I think that one of the neat things about cloud computing, if you look at why people are flocking so quickly to it, it's not only it's more cost effective, but it also allows you to invent at several orders of magnitude faster than the old model. And when you look at a lot of these emerging economies, you see it in the Middle East, and we just announced a region that we're launching in the Middle East, and I think you'll see it in Africa. These countries are trying to really reinvent their economies, and they have disproportionately large populations of young people where they want to open up the economies for what's possible, and technology is a huge enabler. And so I think that the cloud will be it will have a big role in helping these economies grow. I think it will help not just established companies change their cost structures and their customer experiences and invent much more quickly, but I think it will enable a whole ecosystem of new startups that will build new businesses and change what's possible for people in those countries.
So we've seen you guys massively build out your data centers and very, very quickly. Does that slow down at any point, or do you expect it just as rapid an expansion as we've seen, or faster?
I think we have a lot of expansion in front of us. I mean, the thing that we always try to remind ourselves is that the business is a $15 billion revenue run rate business, still growing over 40% year over year. And I'd say we're just at the beginning stages of the meat of enterprise adoption in the US. I'd say outside the US, we're 12 to 36 months behind, depending on the country. So I think there is a humongous amount of growth in front of us. I think this is the biggest technology shift in our lifetimes. And if you look at the market segments that something like AWS addresses, which is infrastructure, software, hardware, data center services, and then some of the solutions we're building a little bit further up the stack worldwide, I think that's trillions of dollars. So I think we're in the relative early stages of expansion.
The DOJ under Trump, the DOJ under Obama have both been pretty aggressive in their contention that cloud companies need to turn over data of customers, and even customers that are overseas, and even when that data is overseas. How much of a concern is that for your overseas customers? How much of a concern is that for you?
I think customers from the very beginning of AWS have always cared about this issue, and they always want to make sure that the data they store in the cloud in AWS is secure and private. And our view is that our customers' data is our customers' data. And in the scheme of things, if you look, even though it's kind of become a juicy, interesting issue, there just haven't been very many occasions of governments being able to, even asking for the data. But for companies that are worried about it, what they do is they encrypt the data. And when you encrypt the data and you keep the keys yourself, even in the odd event that a government asks, to try and get access, and for us, they have to, if they ask, we don't just say yes. We always advocate on behalf of our customers. They have to come with a subpoena, and even in the odd cases where they might be able to come with a subpoena and have a legal right to the data, if you've encrypted the data and you own the keys, there's not much people can do with it.
So where do you see AWS in the next, let's say, 5 years?
Well, gosh, I think that, and we've been saying this for a while, but I think you're seeing it bear out in the market, that the vast majority of computing is going to be done in the cloud. Very few companies in the fullness of time, I don't know if that's 5 years from now or 10 years from now or 15 years from now, but very few companies will own their own data centers, and those that do will have much smaller footprints, and all of that is moving to the cloud. So I think we're at the very beginning of this big shift. As I mentioned, I think you can expect a lot of geographic expansion from us. I think you can expect huge investments and continued substantial capabilities in machine learning and AI and connected devices and IoT. I think the database space is radically changing in this world, where I think customers are fed up with what's been the case the last couple decades, and I think they really want database freedom. It's why it's, Aurora, which is our database engine, is the fastest growing service in the history of AWS. I think you'll see more and more serverless. And I think voice will be an increasingly larger percentage of the total applications out there. When we first started being able to use applications on a phone, tapping a few times felt pretty handy. Then you use an application on something like Alexa, a voice-driven application, and it actually seems awfully inconvenient to have to tap 3 or 4 times. And so I think you'll see an explosion of voice applications over time as well.
You work AWS works very closely with Alexa, and I know you said you don't play favorites, but talk to us a little bit about the benefits that Alexa gets from AWS and vice versa, and how you see that in the future as voice scales.
Yeah, I think the benefits Alexa gets from AWS is, first of all, their cost structure is very lean. They're able to save a lot of money. They only spend what they need. They don't have to make big upfront investments. And then they're able to innovate at a much faster clip than they would if they were trying to do it themselves on premises. I think one of the most interesting, misunderstood, and underreported parts of Amazon over the last 5 to 10 years, because people got interested in AWS, is how fast our consumer business has innovated. It's kind of breathtaking. And I think they would tell you a lot of that is because they get to use the same AWS building blocks that our millions of active customers use as well. I think that what they also get is that they get to take their scarce resource, who are software engineers, and instead of having them work on the undifferentiated heavy lifting of infrastructure services, which doesn't differentiate their business in any way, they can offload that to AWS, and they get to work on what differentiates the Alexa platform and set of services. I think what AWS gets from Alexa, and I would say from Amazon in general, is a very demanding, very knowledgeable, very sophisticated set of customers inside of Amazon. And so almost all of our services, they're using a very large scale, and they're not shy about giving us feedback and telling us what we need to improve. And for us, customer feedback drives everything we do, and so it's an incredibly useful customer to have.
So you mentioned your consumer business. Are there any particular trends that you would highlight in there that we should know about?
Well, I think if you look at every area of the consumer business, they are innovating at such a rapid clip. I don't know if you get a chance to buy things on our retail site, but the amount of features. Thank you. But the amount of features that you see every month that are new. You look at look at the pace of our devices and the services around our devices. Look at what we're doing on the Prime Music and the Prime Video side. We have a payments business. I mean, just across the board at Amazon, there's an incredible amount of invention all over the place.
Right.
Not all the invention works, by the way, which is okay, but we're trying lots of things.
On that note, last question. As the Amazon empire grows, buying Whole Foods, opening grocery stores, going online to offline, how do you see AWS fitting in the bigger Amazon empire of the future?
I don't really think of it as an empire, but I think that I think AWS's role is the same role that it's been for the last several years, and that we always hoped it would play, which is that we would like AWS to be the technology infrastructure underneath all the applications that developers or companies may think about building. And that includes Amazon. As I said, I think Amazon has been able to invent at a really rapid rate, in significant part because they use AWS. But we'd like to play that role for really any company or any developer. And it's why it's so important to us, and we've been so disciplined and vigilant about making sure that while Amazon's consumer business is a very important external customer, they're treated just like an external customer. The vast majority of Amazon's consumer competitors use AWS, and the only reason they do is two reasons. One is because we have a much more capable platform than anybody else, and also because they feel like they're treated every bit as importantly as we treat Amazon's consumer business.
All right, Andy Jassy, thank you so much for
Thanks
joining
for
us.
having me.
Great
I
to have
appreciate
you.
it.